In this lecture, we'll look at how Kluger's account differs from Levi and Wiernik, and in particular how her experience of the Holocaust as a child has made for a complex recounting of her life and its many fissures. We'll then look at how she describes her relationships and experiences as a child and the confrontation with racism in Austria. This will include examining the broader aspect of children and their segregation and exclusion from school, playgrounds, cinemas, as Jews are slowly banned from all public areas. Levi states at the beginning of his text that he wants to think and reflect upon what has happened and how people were degraded. It is a plea with a curse about what will happen or become of your life if you forget or neglect or skim over the lessons of the Holocaust. He provides us with his personal experience, but he is looking for this larger truth, one that universalizes, that the questions posed rest upon what existence is, what meaningful existence should be. It connects us with, in a way, that we have an image of what humanity is, and that when put into a situation, a system that is designed to rob everyone of their dignity and pit them against each other in a struggle for survival, then the questions concerning morality, humanity, individuality become darker, occluded, and difficult to answer clearly. It is a question of an ideal, and so he uses forms that go towards that notion. There is a poetic sense to his writing. It provides a certain aesthetic that this is part of his return to humanity. By writing the book, he is reclaiming what has been robbed from him for a time. And his writing is part of this process, this act of defiance, that his will, his personality, and his intellect will not succumb to the camp. It is also the story of a struggle in that he endeavors to reclaim his identity through the act of writing. And then, on the other hand, Ruth Kluger's experience focuses on the personal, on the emotional, provided that it was a different experience, one that was just as vulnerable and threatened as Levi's, but one that doesn't universalize or ask questions about humanity and what could be gained from the experience. Instead, Kluger focuses on the relationships she has with her family and the implications and feelings that go along with being set out for such a traumatic impact that racism can have at such a young age. She looks at the individual experience and what was particular to her youth. Kluger reflects on the emotional and uncomfortable feelings that demand honest reflections on what was lost, what was taken, her parents, her family, her childhood. It is an act of sorting through in the hopes of recovering those moments that were stolen from her. Not material objects, but moments that have been lost with the people she will never see again, never be able to know again, not know where to go to be close to them, and to never share her news and her life. But how do these different approaches affect the form? Well, Kluger tells the story of before and after, as well as during. She focuses on very personal reflections, while Levi's tone is more detached, introspective, not angry, but rational. Kluger allows her personality, her emotions, to represent how she felt about people and their behavior, including those who were close to her, like her Aunt Irene, her father, and her experience as a woman. Kluger reflects and criticizes not only the camps, but also how people think about and depict them. With Levi, we have a linear narrative that follows a chronological path, while Kluger's narrative often interspersed with insights, forming a collage of different periods that allow her contemporary or later world to connect with her childhood experiences. This is much more focused on her personal relationships, and the tone is also harsher, more critical of the people in her life and in the estimation of their decisions. With Levi, people are measured against an ideal of humanity, while Kluger considers first how they interacted with her, and she remains critical even of those who suffered or were killed. How they acted towards her is her first memory of them. And it is an honesty of experience, and its purpose is to disrupt the notion that racism brings people together. Much rather, it agitates and breaks down familial bonds. In the case of her aunt and uncle, she cannot bring herself to think of her and her husband, my great uncle, with commiseration. For Kluger, her aunt remains the person who would insist that she drink water after eating cherries, took her collection of streetcar tickets, scolded her when she recited poems, and insisted she eat all of her food before going to school. But worst of all was that she was the one who thought it her duty to keep her from bothering her mother. But I was also scared of my father, in the manner of children who aren't intimate with their parents and have difficulty gauging their mood. Her relationship with her father is a complex one. feeling abandoned by him, left behind, still wanting to be with him. She remembers him as witty, deadpanning how to make sausages, and being distinguished that he stayed out of the fray at her school. She still wants to connect with him in some way, performing a ritual or doing something to honor his memory. She imagines how he would react to computers nowadays and tried to play chess, but she felt that he had become disappointed with her. And so she continues to play chess today just to remind herself of her time with her father. There were also moments she remembers where he was less than kind, angry with her and her cousin Yulia for taking his manual typewriter just to play a game, and then was scolded for it. She feels like there is some unfinished business with him. Her feelings about his fate are still open wounds. She tries to reconcile the image she has of him as an authority figure for her and the pitiful fate that she imagines he suffered. There is also her description of her mother and how she could be purposefully mean and longing for the son who is no longer there, while dismissive of Ruth, the child who was by her side. Her mother told her that she liked Shorshi better than her because she had known him longer. She blamed Ruth for not being able to retrieve Shorshi. It is not just people that she writes critically of, but also her relationship to her religion and its relegation and exclusion of women in certain rites and rituals. She is rightfully upset over not being able to say a simple prayer for her father, the Kaddish, since only males are supposed to be able to say that. It is the inequity of these rules and their oppressive nature, the way in which they elevate certain people at the expense of others. There is an element of the form how that you can't know about, and that is Ruth Kluger's Still Alive is an adaptation of the German version Weiterleben from 1992. One primary difference is that Weiterleben was written with a typewriter, which requires one to think about the chronology and wording before typing. The manuscript then takes on a form in which memory is intertwined, less chronologically. It's representing the interrelatedness and connectedness of the experiences of the past with the present day. It isn't just a translation, however. She adapts and changes the text. For example, where she used pseudonyms in the first version, she uses people's real names in Still Alive. She rewrites the epilogue so that it doesn't just end in the hospital, but rather she reflects upon her work at University of California, Irvine. And some of the chapters that discuss the post-war German context are completely left out, and she's more forgiving as well of her mother in our text, while allusions to American culture and historical events are introduced, such as segregation, Vietnam, and environmental disasters. So this version is meant to be provocative. She wants to start a dialogue. She anticipates the argument. She calls the German version ein deutsches Buch, dedicated to my friends in Göttingen. And she tailors each of these versions to its primary audience. Our book is meant for an American audience, and she tries to be provocative with you. What this means is that the way in which individuals may think about and be critical of the representation of the Holocaust can change over time and in different contexts. And that pushes against the idea of a universal truth, that it might provide some insight to the human mind that could remain static. Instead, it implies that memory can change with new information or in different contexts. For example, with her German audience, she wants to provoke an honest discussion and argumentation about particular events, while her American audience, she uses it to start a discussion of comparative events, such as instances of US injustice, racism, and foreign military engagements. There are yet other alterations that are prompted by her responses to reader reactions, and she includes their correspondence and responses into her new account, which forces her to revise her initial thoughts, her memory, and understanding of the event. She doesn't just change it, but she tells us that she's changed it. And by telling us that her initial knowledge or understanding was incorrect, she's telling us that a story about the past, even one that is close to one's own, can be incorrect. Telling a story about the past, even one's own, is a constant act of memory that can be affected by new information, so that even a survivor has to be ready to reflect upon it, criticize it, and revise her own understanding of it. If she has to do so, then we definitely should be open and ready to. If we compare her writing to others with a focus on the differences in purpose, with Wiernik, the purpose was to get the truth out. With Levi, he focuses on the struggle to maintain one's humanity, to remain human in an inhumane environment. And Kluger, she writes to reflect on and criticize not just the camps, but how people think about them and how they are depicted. So her purpose extends to how it affected her personally, how she's attempting to recover the memory of her relationships that were lost. And this is her reason for starting it before the war and ending it after. It is about her place in the world, recovering the memories of her family. The book is, in a way, her prayer, her Kaddish, her act of doing something in order to remember her father, her mother, and to recover those she has lost. Think about who is the most important person in your childhood. Well, most would answer that their primary caregivers, the adults who functioned as the mother or father, were the most important. And it's not hard to imagine the devastating effect that the loss of one of these people, or even access to them, can have on a child's well-being. This is why we have so much focus on these few times that Ruth was able to spend time with her father. And we get a sense for the pain of her missing him, of not being recognized when he returns, of his anger that gets directed towards her, and the resentment she directs towards her mother for trying to change the underlying facts to better fit the image that she wants to portray of him and herself as parents. Not only does her mother present her with contrary explanations of her father, but she has herself constructed a way in which she has imagined, thought he had perished, and then abruptly has to reorganize her thoughts. The metaphor of running through a dark living room, bumping into things, not knowing where the order of it is, being disorganized. As you read, you will get the sense that she is conveying this to you through the experience of reading the book. There, you also are confronted with bumping into uncomfortable information. It seems disorganized in a way that sets it apart from Levi's clear, linear storytelling. And you experience her struggle through the challenge that reading her memoir can bring at times. We are in the dark room, bumping into things, and she is rearranging them. She must rearrange them herself as we follow her through. In the revision to her book, Kluger has been contacted by a woman who had access to the documents that list her father's departure and where he ultimately was taken. Though she had thought he had died in the gas chambers and had to ask herself whether this man with no elbows had to climb on top of children in his death throes as every last gasp of breath became more labored, instead she learns that he never went to Auschwitz as she had believed, but rather he was deported from Drancy on a train that then headed north to Lithuania and Estonia. She doesn't know exactly how he died. While many of these passengers were executed in force, she still doesn't know. But what she knows now is that it wasn't how she had imagined it for years, that it wasn't in the gas chambers. I should be relieved that he didn't die that ultimate nightmare of death in a crowded gas chamber, that it was different and perhaps a slightly lesser nightmare. But now my mental furniture has to be rearranged, and it feels as if I am running through my house in the dark, bumping into things. Her memories about the past, her ideas, they have become very concrete, and changing them now is difficult. It can't be undone all at once, and she experiences it as very disorienting. How did he die then? I know so little about who he was, and now I don't even know this final, unalterable act. These stories have no end. As long as we live and care, they have no end. Not only because we never cease to remember them, but because as long as we live and care, they have the potential to change. So here are two versions, the one with which I have lived for more than half a century, and the others still new and undigested. There are two versions also in the memories that she actually has of her childhood. There isn't just one contested truth about the past, even in her own head. And so now as an adult, she knows things that should affect her childhood memories, but she can't touch them. She can't change those things about her father. It's without tremendous effort. My mother claims he was crazy about me, but that's like staging and then retouching a family photo. I know better. She uses her lack of skill in playing chess as evidence of his indifference towards her, and also how he scolded her harshly when she played with the typewriter with her cousin. Harder still is the last interaction she had with him, a thrashing after she wanted to be close, wanted to see him, and be seen after this time he was imprisoned by the SS. So we witness the devastating effect that these unwarranted detainments and maltreatments have on self-esteem, self-worth, and otherwise good people, and how it creates these rifts within the family. Try as I may, I can't change these images or the feelings that go with them, and concentrate instead on what I know happened to him in the end. For I only know of his fate, I don't recall it, and imagined pictures have a lower priority than remembered ones. There's a gap between knowledge and memory, and I can't bridge it. No matter how hard she tries, she still can't get an entire picture of his life. I'm trying to do this and I'm failing. Because memory is a prison of sorts too. You can't shake or alter the images engraved there. It is again like the mental furniture. It is difficult to change, to move. The most precise memories are thus the ones that seduce us into lies because they won't be budged by anything outside of themselves. Memories are not always precise. There's a focus that may be different. In the example of her father's death, it is a memory or a knowledge that was constructed from what she thought had happened, a projection. Since she wasn't there to witness it, she had to guess. After she constructed it, it was for her as if it had happened, and it happened in a way that was iconic. She doesn't trust her mother's memory either because she thinks her mother bent the world to her needs, the needs of her disturbed ego. So Kluger is pointing out that much of our memory is functional or utilitarian, and that we remember what is important to us. In her style of writing, the importance of memory is emphasized because we have her often writing about different periods of time, positioning past and present, as memory does, while she reenacts the movement of memory. What was it like to experience segregation as a child? Remember our own history. The segregation in the States served as a model for what had happened then in Germany and Austria. In Kluger's own memories of her childhood, we can see the lasting ones are those of her family and of segregation, of not being able to understand the mind of the cruel, petty tyrant who feels justified to enforce laws that diminish another's dignity. Those humiliations weren't just felt by adults, like Klemper's death by 1,000 gnat bites, but also by children. It was a sudden shock to many families who were secular, very well integrated into German culture, that they should now do racial homework to find out if they had been labeled Jewish, and then face harassment, bullying, ostracization, and the threat of death. She remembers the separating of activities and the indifference of the education of Jewish children. Jewish children didn't understand the effects of exclusion at first, but the pain of being left out hurt them. And soon it became harder for Jews in the Nazi schools, which drove them then to their own Jewish schools. Kluger relates to us an ugly display of racism and entitlement that she had observed in a sandbox, when a child was forcibly removed from the sandbox by an Aryan mother who thought they had some right to deprive this child of play. The playful child thought at first that it was a game, but then was removed again and understood then that this was attack on her self-worth, exclusion. We see how other children imitate the ugly entitlement of the adults as she snuck into the movie theater to watch Snow White. And the petulant baker's daughter then behind her feels it is her right to scold her, to warn her, to ban her from wanting to see this movie. Other experiences included being kicked off of public buses when it was found out a child was Jewish, open bullying and harassment on the streets from former classmates, sometimes friends who then turned on them. The friendly teachers soon were unable to associate or recognize their former pupils in the street, and Jewish children were soon instructed to walk in pairs, only during daylight, and to keep to themselves and out of sight when possible. In school, close friends were soon lost, divided into those who were permitted to participate and earn awards, and then Jewish children who were excluded but forced to watch. Examples include the rejection of Jewish motherhood by teachers who denigrated Jewish children as second class, making them unable to celebrate their mothers at school along with the others. Kluger herself notes the crafting of swastikas as a new activity, and Jewish kids were left to themselves, uncared for, unwatched, excluded. Children were asked to do homework by their teachers and find out their ancestry, which would later be the premise for their exclusion. So on field trips and assemblies, Jews were excluded from participating, sometimes forced to listen to songs that contained lyrics on the murder of Jews. In biology class, they were instructed on how science deemed Jewish people less and German people more worthy, based primarily on the pseudoscience of phrenology. Eventually, this drove most Jewish students to Jewish private schools where the faculty and curriculum were constantly changing. It was that these people felt justified in depriving others of their joy. They aligned their identities with the denigration of those unlike themselves. It was this self-justification of their actions that Kluger recognized would lead to further escalation, threats, and violence. Kluger, as a child, recognizes the double bind of her existence. There is the stranger who wants to help by secretly giving her an orange she didn't ask for, taking a risk to do so, and her mother, who scolds her for accepting the orange. But then what else could she do? Should she have denounced the person whose intention was to help? She also begins to trust her own intuition over her mother's. Uh, Her mother at times seems to exaggerate and sometimes even lie about things in order to inflate her ego. She tries to find an escape in the cinema, but all the films are training these young men for futures as colonial masters who dominate others, positioning themselves above them. So she considers whether or not she could have left with her dad on his passport. Could she perhaps even have left on a transport to Jerusalem or to England? In part, she blames her mother. She was the one who was with her, the one who isn't imagined or longed for, because she was there. In this lecture, we looked at how Kluger's Still Alive is a different account of the Holocaust that focuses on the relationships, and we see much more of what came before and after. We get glimpses into her confrontation with the racist practices of the Nazis and those who were emboldened by these to elevate themselves by denigrating others, not the least of which were set into practice in the schools. As we continue with Still Alive, consider the long-term social costs of disrupting a childhood, as next week we will read about her deportation and experience in the family camps at Theresienstadt and Auschwitz.